Hi there, boys and girls. Here at the outset of the episode, I just want to include a quick note that due to some unavoidable alterations to my computer rig here, some of my sound settings have changed. Time-honored settings that were crafted for you by expert artisans. Or artisan experts. They are just the cutest, but this gang of well-trained fleas will not reassemble in their original order, and so I'm a little nervous that our time together will not be up to its usual auditory high standards. I can only apologize for that, and ask that if this is the case, let me know, and I will figure out some way to make it up to you. No doubt with a bonus episode that also sounds terrible. You know I really care. You've heard the expression, we're number 2, so we try harder. Well, we're number 798.6, and we try really hard. Does it help? That question is under review. Thank you for your patience. Sincerely, the management. Now let's begin. If you're a kid who's a baseball fan and you start as young as I did, the players and managers that you first meet are much older than you. As time passes, the gap between your age and the age of the players inexorably starts to narrow. A major rite of passage occurs when the first players who are born after you were start arriving in the big leagues. Now, Ken Griffey Jr. is older than I am, but not by a lot. It was okay for him to be the youngest major leaguer in 1989 because he was still older than I was at that time. Somewhere in the early 90s, though, the rookies started passing me by. The first rookie of the year to be younger than me was Raul Mondesi, who won the award while playing with the Dodgers in 1994. I was in college and fairly miserable, not just because of that, but because Bud freaking Selig, had canceled the postseason and the offseason and the start of the next season. And how was I supposed to get through my fall classes without having baseball to think about? I don't want to say that I hate Bud Selig because that's a very strong word, but I do have a dislike for that old man. Derek Jeter, who won the AL Rookie of the Year award in 1996, is not only younger than I am, he's about the same age as my younger sister. It was just all downhill from there. Now I'm older than a lot of managers and general managers and the peanut vendors, and so flow the sands of the hourglass. These thoughts are occasioned by the passing of former Angels outfielder Garrett Anderson, who left the world this week about 6 weeks prior to what would have been his 54th birthday. When the players who are younger than you stop arriving and start dying, that too is some kind of note that your odometer might be about to roll over. Just recently, we lost all-stars like Phil Garner and Davey Lopes, who were actually both children of the 1940s, but were still playing fairly regularly into my teenage years. Another recent passing, which upset me for some reason, even though he wasn't a great player or a famous player, and he wasn't someone I had a sentimental association with, was backup catcher Tom Nieto. He was well older than I am, but he was just a habitué of the top sets that my friends and I collected when we were in our adolescence. And I just remember seeing him. He was, I don't mean to denigrate him by saying he was a common card that recurred frequently, but I think of him that way. I mean the card, the square of cardboard, as distinct from the person who I didn't know. And of course, as an individual, he was much greater than that. But in terms of my interaction with him as a baseball fan, that was the way I experienced him, by ripping open a wax pack, and there he was, again. I'm thinking specifically of, this is ridiculous that I remember this, but his Topps 1987 card when he was with the Twins, those are the, let's call them misguided cards with the sort of Comic Sans font for the player names and the wood grain background, as if they were taken in your Uncle Fred's den, which he paneled himself as a weekend DIY project about 1979, 1980. You know the one I'm talking about. Before I could drive, my best friend and I would walk down to the local Toys R Us, and we bought a lot of our cards there, pack after pack after pack, building the full set. And the font on those cards was so very Toys R Us that it was like there was a gestalt that involved, like you had to buy them at Toys R Us to get the full experience of the 1987 cards. And the funny thing is, I'm not terribly sentimental about those years. I'm still very good friends with that friend. He's like a brother to me, so I'm sentimental about him. I'm sentimental about the time we spent together, but there are top sets I love more, and there are phases of my life that I love more. That was not the happiest time for me for a lot of reasons. But for whatever reason, I associate Tom Nieto with that time, and therefore, when I saw that he had recently passed on, I felt the loss. I should also note the passing of Terrence Gore, kind of the Herb Washington of our times, who died in February at 34 years old. The cause wasn't disclosed, but either way, that's just gutting and so unfair. He had a young family, and maybe he had some baseball left in him, too. Garrett Anderson is a sad loss, too. Not only because he was relatively young, but because he was such a durable part of Major League Baseball for nearly 20 years. He wasn't always good, but one got used to seeing him. He was in the majors from 1994 through 2010 and made 2,529 hits, which is an impressive total by the standards of almost anyone who isn't a Hall of Famer, and hit 293 lifetime, which is somewhere in the top 350 all-time players. And you might say, so what? And I would point out that that's 350 out of 24,000 baseball players since 1876. Insofar as that one area goes, he's in the top 1%. Now, he didn't walk much. He also didn't strike out a lot by the standards of turn of the 21st century baseball, and he wasn't consistent with power production. Some of that was due to the Angels ballpark, which isn't the most friendly to power hitters. Mostly, though, he was just a guy who put the ball in play, and whatever happened, happened. He hit as few as 8 home runs in a full season and as many as 35. If he happened to combine one of his higher batting average seasons with one of his better power years, he was a valuable hitter. The other years, he was somewhere between fine and The 2 years where he best got everything organized were 2002 and 2003, when he was 30 and 31 years old. In the former year, he hit .306 with a .332 on-base percentage and a .539 slugging percentage. Said slugging percentage included a league-leading 56 doubles. I love 50 double seasons. He also had 29 home runs and drove in 123 runs. In 2003, he hit .315, .345, .541, with 49 doubles, missed it by that much, 29 homers, and 116 ribbies. And that was more or less it for his bat, because he started having arthritis in his back after that. From 2004 through 2010, he hit .281, .317, .430 in nearly 900 games. In context, that was just placeholder stuff for a left fielder of the time, especially one who was aging, and whereas Anderson had been a pretty decent defensive outfielder earlier on, good enough that in some seasons the Angels decided they'd be better off playing him in center field. Like all of us, he'd gotten older and slower, and those days were gone. I think what I'm trying to say is that Anderson was an all-time great Angel in some senses, without being an all-time great Angel in many others. He was an all-time great in terms of longevity and counting stats, not in most other qualitative ways. None of which comments on what kind of person he was or how it was to have him around the clubhouse. That's a separate matter. This is something, though, that the Angels have always done, no matter who has owned them or which of their many general managers have been running things. They overvalue the wrong qualities and overpay for replaceable talent. Anderson made about $76.5 million in his career, all but $3 million of it from the Angels. And I'm glad that they enjoyed his company. That's a real value. It's a real thing. And if the fans enjoyed it, I'm happy for them too. Look, we've all worked in places where we couldn't stand showing up at the building because of the guy in the next cubicle or the next office. I've mentioned occasionally on the show that one of my first jobs out of college involved this kind of fiddly work, checking simple math, but still you had to concentrate to do it. I was in the cubicle next to the fellow who would talk to himself all day. He had a big radio-style voice, and he would just randomly shout things like, midgets, midgets on my toes, midgets, midgets, midgets. I wanted to kill that guy. Thing is, if a baseball team wants to win, they're incentivized to keep that fellow around, particularly if he hits 350 with 40 home runs every year. But that's easy for us to say because we don't have to go to the ballpark with him 162 times a year plus spring training. We don't have to shower next to him. The larger point is, though, from a strict baseball point of view, aside from the 2 seasons that I pointed out, and perhaps 1 or 2 others in a long career, the Angels could have done just as well for less money and possibly better. You take away a few points of batting average, but add a few walks. You take away a few doubles, but add a few home runs. You might come out in the same place or even better. This is a neat statistic, by the way. Anderson drew 429 career walks. This is a completely unfair thing to say, but Juan Soto surpassed that total 5 years ago. Anderson had the 7th lowest percentage in history of walks per plate appearance by anyone who had over 8,000 of the things. He had over 9,000. It's Gary Templeton, the shortstop, Stuffy McGinnis, the first baseman, Frank White, the second baseman, Willie Davis, the Dodgers outfielder, Lloyd Wainer, the Pirates outfielder, who's in the Hall of Fame for inexplicable reasons, and Willie Wilson. And then it's him. Take out the intentional walks, of which he and Templeton had many, and he jumps up to 4th. It's Templeton with walks in only 2.8% of his plate appearances, Bill Buckner at 3.4%, and Willie Davis and Anderson tied at 3.5%. The only other player under 4% in history, Steve Garvey. This is a selfish thought because Anderson undoubtedly had a lot of people who cared for him on a personal basis rather than on a baseball basis, and then more who loved him on a baseball basis as well. The foregoing analysis is not intended to take a single thing away from them. Their loss is real, mine is not, and the facts of his baseball career are beside the point. What I'm about to say is not meant to claim any of their mourning. I'm not entitled to it. It's just that when players who are about your age start crossing the great divide, one is reminded of Satchel Paige. Don't look back. Something might be gaining on you. You know the story of Orpheus, right? Not looking back is one of the hardest things anyone can ask you to do. Well, Anderson is well out of the looking back part now. There's only looking forward into the mists. And on that basis, we welcome him to the infinite inning. Well, hello there, and welcome back to the Infinite Inning, episode number 371 in an ongoing series. You can pick out whichever one you like from the spinner rack at your local drugstore or magazine stand. Remember when drugstores had magazine stands? I suppose they still do. They're rather shrunken from what they used to be. Do you remember the hostile ones? Some convenience stores, when I was younger, would have these signs up like, "This is not a library. You must buy before reading." Man, I'm going to buy a Slurpee soon enough. The magazine is just a bonus. You're still going to get your money one way or the other. It's just a question of how much and when. Similarly, when I was a kid, I don't know if it's still like this, I took one vacation with my folks to Virginia Beach, Virginia, and the place was so damn hostile. There were signs like that everywhere in regards to parking, not magazines. I guess they didn't anticipate becoming a tourist destination, so they built 1,000 hotels, but only 3 parking spots. And so it was like combat in the streets. And you could take for granted the kind of signs that you still see everywhere: parking by permit only, violators will be towed at own expense, fine. But there were signs like, "Don't be stupid. Don't even think about parking here at your pancake restaurant," which I was just going to buy breakfast from. Then you'd walk in tentatively and the hostess would say, "Howdy, y'all. Would that be 4 for breakfast?" And you'd be like, "What? You just threatened me implicitly outside in the parking lot a second ago. Don't pretend to be all friendly now. Don't be stupid, y'all. How about some nice Virginia ham, you stupid tourists? Don't even think about not having the Virginia ham." And I said to myself, I am never, for the rest of my life, coming back to this place. The vibe does not suit me. And you know what, pals and gals, I never have. I'm sure they're suffering deeply for it. I hope that this episode of the show finds you well. I am, as ever, your convivial host, far more convivial than any potential parking space in Virginia Beach, Virginia. They call me Stephen Goldman, and I will be your guide on this trip to the past, on a mission to better understand the present, the vehicle, the time machine, as ever being the game of baseball. Speaking of Garrett Anderson and the Angels today, as I speak these words, not necessarily when you're listening to them, I can't control that. The Mets lost their 9th consecutive game to drop their record to 7-13. But good news, Garrett Anderson's 2002 Angels started that season 6-14, one worse than the Mets, and still won the World Series. Bad news, they're the only ones. I am deeply sorry to report that to any Mets fans on the time machine today. Please do not attempt to leap off the time machine while it is still in progress. That ends really badly. You could land anywhere in the time stream. I would not want you to step on the wrong butterfly or the wrong butterfly to step on you. It's funny how that can sort of invert sometimes. If you followed the Mets in the offseason, you might have gone through a number of stages, as I did, in thinking, this is really wrong. This can't possibly work. What are they thinking? And then as the winter progressed and they had stirrings of activity, it might work. It's just so crazy. There's some controlling intelligence here, surely. I am merely not seeing the entire picture. It's fine. It'll work. There's a lot to like here. And then now that the season has started and we're almost 3 weeks in, I'm back to it never was going to work. What a terrible offseason they had. As you know, at this stage of my life, I don't really root for any individual team. I just root for good process, and I'm not sure what theirs was. You can't really reverse engineer it. What I can reverse engineer is what I got up to during the time we were apart this week over at Patreon. I wrote the usual 4 Dead Player of the Day posts. They were Irish Musial, the Phillies and Giants outfielder, and pal of Casey Stengel's. I did not mention that part. See, I don't have to bring up Casey every single time I have the opportunity. He and Irish actually both lived in the same hometown, Glendale, California, and they were teammates both on the Phillies and on the Giants. Beauty McGowan, an outfielder of the 1920s who was kind of an epically busted prospect, but a great minor league player. Gary Carter, I'm sure he needs no introduction. And Tony Mahoney, who was a Negro Leagues pitcher, certainly not one of the famous ones, not one of the top tier ones either, but he was an American hero of the First World War, and it cost him dearly. That story and approximately 250 others much like it are available for anyone who wants to sign up over at Patreon. And if you can't do that, I understand times are hard, money is dear, and I do make a good number of them available to whoever comes by because as I said last week, I write them to be read, and I would much rather have you in than out over something as paltry as a few haypennies. And so, in fact, I made Tony Mahoney open to anyone who would like to come in and read. Tony Mahoney deserved that much. As for Baseball Prospectus, my longtime home, my ancestral castle, I was so besotted by Beauty McGowan that I wrote more about him this week in my spot at Baseball Prospectus, and I likened his story to that of Mets first baseman Jared Young, who just went down with a torn meniscus, which feels rather harsh and tragic and unfair because he's a true journeyman, a low draft pick going way back, a 15th round draft pick out of Canada. Most Canadians don't get scouted very heavily. COVID shut down the minor leagues at the wrong time for someone of his sort of moderate skill set, but he made the Mets this spring, and that probably is tied up with the fact that their offseason blueprint, as I said, was so sketchy and incoherent because they got rid of their first baseman, or they didn't so much get rid of him as pocket veto him by not making Pete Alonso a contract offer, which, as I said here, is defensible, but what's less so is not going all that far in trying to replace him. It stands to reason that it will be difficult for you to replace a guy who has averaged 42 home runs per 162 games in his career. But you have to at least try, don't you? Well, they didn't, so that opened up some room for Young to play, and he hit rather well, which you can't say about many of the Mets at this stage of the season, and he promptly got hurt. Life is not fair sometimes. Life is not fair often. Life is not fair constantly. Life is not fair usually. And on that subject, we are headed for a break, fairly or unfairly, but on the other side, I want to talk about a player who was a pretty chill guy by all accounts. Not much bothered him, but he found out belatedly that life was unfair to him in a very profound way, and he needed to fix it. Did he fix it? Did he get help when it was needed? Find out right after this brief intermission. This week, Major League Baseball observed Jackie Robinson Day, which is both welcome and sort of this self-aggrandizing thing they do every year to obscure baseball's long history of institutional racism. Hooray! Jackie Robinson happened to liberate us all from bigotry. Boo, it was our bigotry which made Jackie Robinson necessary, and not just theirs. It belonged to the whole nation. It was reflective of the country's long history of institutional racism. Shh, you're not supposed to know that now. I've observed many times that if you take the years from Plessy versus Ferguson to Brown versus the Board of Ed, the bookends of legalized segregation in the United States, and you overlay the time from Cap Anson and others chasing Fleet Walker out of baseball to the arrival of Jackie Robinson, Larry Doby, and the rest of their cohort, they don't perfectly align, but it's really close, a difference of a few years on either end. Baseball was a little late at one point, a little early in some others. That's down to the actions of individuals. But in general, they were just following the zeitgeist. As I said, we're not supposed to talk about these things right now, because if you don't acknowledge there was a wrong, then you can denigrate the fixes that were tried for those wrongs and criticize them as unfair and unnecessary and extreme and take them back and not replace them with anything, but simply go back to the old way of doing things. I thought that this week we might mark the occasion of integration in baseball by noting one of the less remembered players in the generation which broke the color line. In this case, the first African-American player in the history of the Boston/Atlanta/Milwaukee Braves. I got the order wrong there, but you get the point. Sam Jethro, switch-hitting center fielder. I'm not sure I have a huge point to make here, other than to just note a few things about him and what he went through, which was not overtly racist. That's the interesting thing about it. He didn't, by his own account, and by the account of people around him, really go through a lot of the kind of terrible hazing that Jackie and others went through. And when it came to the aspects of segregation that were still in force in the country that he had to put up with, say not being able to stay with the team on the road, or not being able to rent in certain places in Boston, he, again, being sort of a mellow guy, would just say, well, it wasn't so bad. I stayed with some nice people. I stayed in some decent places. I got better deals than I would have staying with local families and was able to pocket the difference in terms of the money. It just was what it was. And whatever the hostility was of fans at Fenway, and I don't know that it was more extreme than anywhere else to players like Doby, the hometown fans in Braves Field quite liked Sam Jethro. So that really wasn't an issue. Where people went after him, it wasn't the fans, it was the writers. And they went after him on almost a prospect evaluation basis with an extremely skeptical eye, which I think was less about the color of his skin. Call me naive, but it doesn't read that way to me. It reads like they were trying to tear down an extremely hyped player, which Jethro was at the time. As I said, he was a switch-hitting center fielder. He was a pretty good player in the majors for only a couple of years because he was old. He fudged his age and didn't really fool anyone doing so, but it caught up with him eventually, just in the sense that he had about 2 years left before the clock on his skills and his eyesight started to run down. Again, that's not why they went after him, although some writers pointed out, there are guys who said they played with him back in the 30s. He can't be that young. He would have had to be 16 back then. But there was just this liminal space between baseball being really excited to have him in the majors, but simultaneously resenting him because so many were excited to see him play. He had flaws, he had shortcomings, but almost every player does. But I don't recall too many of them getting so much negative coverage just for what they couldn't do on a ball field. I think part of it was that he was playing in Boston when he was, where the media was just really dedicated to ripping players as a way of hyping sales. They, of course, did it with Ted Williams, which is a Greek tragedy level of hubris. Zeus sends you the greatest hitter of all time, and all you do is complain that he isn't nice, and he's not a great outfielder, and he takes too many walks with runners on base. And so Zeus calls up Poseidon, who sends the Kraken and a flood, and now your town rests on the bottom of the Aegean, and who could say that that would have been unfair? Jethro was born in eastern central Mississippi in 1917, but he tended to add 5 years to that date. Braves manager Billy Southworth, asked if he knew that Jethro was older than he said he was, said, "I don't care if he's 50, just as long as he can do the job." And as with all of us, that was true until it wasn't. Then again, with some of us, it's never true. I'm trying, I swear. Jethro was fast. It was natural for people to shorten his surname from Jethro to simply Jet. One book says he was also called Larceny Legs, which A, I do not believe, and B, is pretty funny. In 1949, the Sporting News called him Montreal's Colored Comet and the Ebony Express. The Sporting News, Southern paper, not progressive. Jethro apparently didn't get to play a lot of organized ball when he was young, like high school baseball. I haven't looked into this in his specific case, but part of inequality in terms of schooling in this country, back at the time when Jethro was young, and later too, was that many states had shorter school years for black kids than they did for white kids, had fewer schools that would accept black kids to begin with, or didn't have high schools that accepted them. You hit the 8th grade and you were just kind of done. And so where were you going to play baseball? But he must have played some, because he was good enough to play semi-pro ball and then also good enough to get a brief trial with the Indianapolis ABCs of the Negro American League in 1938. That lasted for all of one game. He then went home for 2 years to take care of his ailing mom. He returned with the Cleveland Buckeyes, again Negro American League, in 1942, when he was 25 years old. I mean, really 25 years old. If you think about how little professional baseball he had played by the time he was in his mid-20s, it's amazing that he got as far as he did and that he was as good as he was, because he's really missing what seemed like some essential reps. In short, basically almost everything that every other player has ever done to prepare himself for a career as a professional ball player, even as long ago as the 1930s, he did not have. So how good was he? As always with Negro League stats, things are kind of messy. Some older books show him as the Negro American League leader in batting average in 3 consecutive years, 1943, 44, and 45. I think I have that right. That's not how Baseball Reference shows it, and what they have is based on more recent research. He was, however, and Baseball Reference agrees with this part, a consistent 300 hitter, a career 313, 368, 482 hitter for the Buckeyes in 161 games that they have uncovered records for. It's 1 full season of leadoff hitter plate appearances, 692. And in that space, he had 47 doubles, 16 triples, and 9 home runs. He took 60 walks, stole 36 bases. Baseball Reference calls that a 150 OPS plus. It's not Josh Gibson, who is just blasting away in the same years and towering above the league like peak Barry Bonds, but it's very good. And unlike Bonds, the only performance-enhancing drugs Gibson and Jethro had were, to borrow from an old Jerry Reed song, caffeine, nicotine, and Benzedrine, and I don't know if they had any Benzedrine. Then again, Benzedrine hit the market in 1935, so maybe they did. During his Buckeye stint, Jethro was one of 3 players, along with Jackie Robinson and Marvin Williams, to participate in the infamous April 16th, 1945 tryout, so called, with the Boston Red Sox at Fenway Park. It was just the 81st anniversary of that date a couple of days ago as I speak these words. It's really a date the Red Sox should mark every year with some act of contrition and rending of garments. That was the day of get those ends off the field. Words rumored to have been spoken by Joe Cronin, Eddie Collins, Tom Yawkey, or maybe no one we've ever heard of at all. Remember I said that Jethro was pretty mellow about most things. So here's the difference between him and Jackie Robinson. Robinson was pretty bitter about that. We knew we were wasting our time, he would growl, but if Jethro had said the same words, he would have said, we knew we were wasting our time, meaning, look, I knew at the outset that nothing was going to come of it, so why would I be angry about it? It was just a workout. In fact, those were his exact words. We didn't feel all that bad about it, he said in 1979. I remember Cronin telling us that we all had the ability to play in the big leagues, but blacks simply weren't being allowed at that time. The Sox were nice. I mean, they didn't take us to dinner or anything, but they were all right. It was just a workout. After Branch Rickey signed Jackie, he started picking off more promising Negro Leagues players. That had always been part of his plan. Rickey never hid that whereas he felt that the color line was morally wrong, he also wanted to make out like a bandit. He signed Jethro for the Montreal Royals at midseason in 1948. He hit .322, .385, .473 with 19 doubles, 11 triples, and 1 home run. I'm not sure what happened between seasons, but he came back with his power unlocked. He had a huge year for Montreal in 1949, hitting .326, .403, .520 with 34 doubles, 19 triples, 17 home runs, and a league record 89 steals. The prior record was 65, set a few years earlier in 1946 by outfielder Marv Rackley, also with Montreal. Parenthetically, Rackley was an interesting player too. He was a career .304 hitter in the minors and a career .317 hitter in the majors in considerably less playing time, but he also didn't do anything else. He had very little power and didn't walk. He also had the bad luck to be a Dodgers prospect at a time when they had a pretty full outfield with Dixie Walker, Pete Reiser, and Carl Furillo. So whatever he might have done in terms of hitting 300 in singles and stealing bases, he was stuck in the minors. Jethro had this same problem, only by the time he came along a few years later, it was Furillo, Duke Snider, and a congeries of left fielders, including Rackley some of the time and Gene Hermansky in front of him. Individually, none of them were that impressive, but collectively, they often did kind of well. And I talked a few shows back about how they eventually tried to solve this problem by acquiring Andy Pafko. Rickey also probably knew how old Jethro was. He also knew that Jethro had never been hotter as a prospect or someone that folks were excited to see. Paul Richards, then managing the Buffalo Bisons, would walk batters in front of him so he couldn't run, which is just idiotic. Yeah, 2 or 3 times he did that, Jethro said. Then if I hit a ground ball, they didn't try for the double play but tried to get me out at first base. Since Jethro was the leadoff hitter, that meant putting the pitcher or a pinch hitter on base. Now think about that. If it's the pitcher, you're taking a guy who, say, has a 15% chance of getting on base, whatever his on-base percentage is, and giving him a 1,000 on-base percentage. Whatever Jethro did or might have done, that's a base runner who has a chance to score. And then think about the play he described. Let's say it's the 9-1-2 spots due up in the inning. You walk the pitcher, foregoing a nearly automatic out. Jethro grounds to short, and the shortstop hurries the throw to first instead of going to second for the force. Now the runner is on second with 1 out, and you have a good chance of scoring him with one of the next 2 batters. Or you do it the normal way. Jethro grounds to short, the shortstop throws to second to force the slow-running pitcher. Jethro steals second, and you have a runner on second with 1 out, same condition, same run expectancy, and yeah, he's a faster runner. He's more likely to score from second on a single, but either way, you still have to get the next 2 batters. Never give away outs on either side. No player, not even Ted Williams, has a 1,000 on-base percentage, right? If his on-base percentage is 500, which it was at least a couple of times, you still have a coin flip chance of retiring him. But if you walk him intentionally, well, then he's automatically on base. Richards later said that Ricky told him that he was able to get an extra $50,000 for Jethro's contract just because moves like that had so enhanced the mythology around him. All the coverage of him at the time said, "We don't know how good he'll be in the majors, but people will want to come out and see him." Frank Shaughnessy, the International League president at the time, said, "Sam doesn't run, he skates. You would want to come out and see that guy." Braves general manager John Quinn called Jethro the greatest attraction in the history of the International League, which is saying something given that Babe Ruth had played in the International League. Of course, he wasn't Babe Ruth yet. The hype around Jethro was so intense that in November 1949, the Sporting News devoted a full tabloid page to two writers with dueling columns on Jethro's chances at being a star. The skeptic, Cy Kritzer, said that Jethro had as much physical equipment as Jackie Robinson, but he isn't as smart. He won't work like Jackie to improve himself. It is my opinion that the 29-year-old Jethro is at the peak of his ability and will fade quickly within a season or two. He was actually right about that last part, mostly because Jethro was already 32. He also said that Jethro wasn't a good bunter and wouldn't learn, that he got too nervous batting out of the leadoff spot, that he didn't run out grounders, and in summary, doesn't have that all-consuming desire or appetite. There's a quote in that story that is really misguided. It's similar to the one I just gave you about his refusal to bunt or to become a better bunter. This was credited to, quote, one International League manager, and assuming the manager wasn't Jethro's manager, Clay Hopper, that leaves Richards, Johnny Keane, Joe Becker, Del Bissonette, Jewel Enns, Tommy Thomas, Jack Dunn II, or Buddy Hassett. Whoever he was, he said, "Certainly Jethro is a good buy, especially for a second division club in the majors. They'd get their money back on him the first 3 weeks of the season as a gate attraction. After that, they can forget about him being a headliner. You know, you can't steal first base and Jethro won't bunt. He likes to swing for those extra base hits." Similarly, a Yankee scout said, "If Jethro could bunt, he would hit 600. Comments like that then or now annoy the heck out of me because we know it doesn't work that way. Even dead ball era players like Roy Thomas, who we've talked about at length on this program, topped out at 327, and I don't think that guy ever did anything except bunt, chop the ball into the dirt, and try to beat the throw and walk. And hey, he was a valuable hitter, at least until the National League adopted the foul ball is a strike rule in part to curtail him specifically, and it did curtail him quite a bit. The cost of his approach was that he very rarely had any extra base hits. He was as close as almost any player has come to being a pure singles hitter. There were players who hit for lower averages, but advanced more runners, and in that sense were more productive. In 1949, Ebony magazine asked every owner about integration, which, remember, most teams had not yet been interested in trying. The owner of the Braves, he was the front man, Lou Perini, said, "If you know of any Negro talent that has any similarity to Robinson, Doby, Page, or Campanella, I would consider it a personal favor if you would advise me of their whereabouts. Our club is very much interested in big league prospects, regardless of color." His comments stand in contrast to those of Yankees co-owner Dan Topping, who said, "There probably will be one or two Negro players on all major league rosters, the Yankees included, in some future year." And Connie Mack, still around, who said, "The future for Negroes in professional baseball appears bright. However, the development of players may be slow, for I have been advised that there are not many Negro boys playing baseball. We regretted to see the Negro National League disband, as we had many friends connected with that league, and besides, my son, Earl, played against many of their former stars, such as Santop and Mackey." He named two future Hall of Fame catchers, Louis Santop and Biz Mackey, one of whom was already dead. It was something of a non sequitur, as if saying, "some of my best friends," or I'm not going to finish that thought. Perini at least was honest in his answer, because the Braves traded for Jethro that October. Ricky gave him away for three pretty obviously fungible players and $100,000. According to Paul Richards, thanks was due to him for half that amount. Again, this had always been part of Ricky's thinking. He was conscious of how it would look if he monopolized all the Negro League's talent, having gotten a head start, and further, that the more he shared, the more secure his revolution would be. But how did Sam Jethro do in the big leagues? We will get to that right after this brief pause for a break. What are you going to do with the time? Use it wisely. In Jethro's National League rookie season, 1950, he hit .273, .338, .442. He hit 18 home runs in a tough park. He stole 35 bases in 44 attempts, the steals leading the league, and crossed the plate an even 100 times. He was voted the Rookie of the Year, the 33-year-old Rookie of the Year, not that anyone knew that. He was even better in 1951, hitting .280, .356, .460 with another 18 home runs. He reached double figures in triples this time. He had 35 steals in 40 tries, again leading the league, and scored 101 times. That season was very much the story of two halves. He slumped badly early in 51, hitting .235 in the first half. Then the Braves got him glasses, and he hit .317 and slugged .532 in the second half. I was trying to think of a recent player who operated in the offensive range that Sam Jethro showed in those two seasons. Remember Shane Victorino, switch-hitting Phillies center fielder by way of Hawaii? His best seasons look very much like Jethro's two big years. Victorino was a good enough player to appear regularly on two World Series winners, the 2008 Phillies and 2013 Red Sox. If Jethro had been in the right place at the right time, which is to say if the color line had been torn a little earlier or he had been born a little later as he pretended to have been born, well, that's what would have happened for him too, or at least it might have. It occurs to me that Victorino, like Jethro, didn't get a lot of respect at first, albeit for very different reasons. He was only a sixth-round draft pick by the Dodgers in 1999. I imagine that kids from Hawaii only got so much attention from scouts back when you had to go there rather than just stream everything. A few years later, the Padres snagged him in the Rule 5 draft and actually gave him a little playing time, but he didn't hit, so they returned him to the Dodgers. In 2004, the Dodgers again left him exposed in the Rule 5 draft, and this time the Phillies took him and held him, but kept him down long enough for him to win the International League MVP. That must be a nice trophy to receive, but all else being equal, you would rather much have been elsewhere. On the other side of his career, Victorino fell off relatively early due to back problems. He even had to give up switch hitting, but really he just gave up hitting, period, and being on the field. He went from being a 6-win player in 2013 to basically rehearsing for retirement in the space of just one off season. As I said earlier, Jethro did have some faults as a player, and again, given his background, it would have been really surprising if he hadn't. Like I said, one of the reasons that major league ball players are so good on fundamentals is the sheer number of opportunities they've had to drill on them. And it doesn't matter if we're talking over 100 years ago and the player just went out and played sandlot games from dawn to dusk, as many old-timers said they did, or in a more modern case, a kid went through the little league and was on travel teams and so on. They've been rehearsed. Sam Jethro didn't have, at least as far as I understand it, as many opportunities to have that kind of training. And of course, every ball player, no matter how skilled an athlete, well, I shouldn't say every, but most are not perfect all-around players who can do everything. Some are much better hitters than fielders and vice versa. Some are fleet, some are slow. Some have great instincts. Some seem to just sort of be making it up as they go along, even with all that training. In Jethro's case, he had the speed to play center, but perhaps not the instincts of the great ball hawks, and he did admit it. He said that, yeah, I misjudge a lot of fly balls, but my speed allows me to catch up to them. The thing was that wasn't always the case. He led the National League in errors in all 3 of his full seasons. He also twice led in assists, but that was because everyone thought that running on him was worth the try. The Boston Globe sports writer Harold Case, in a line that got passed all over the country, wrote, "This Jethro looks so fast and his arm looks so weak that it's even money he can carry the ball into the infield as fast as he can throw it." He also said, on the plus side, that Jethro was the fastest player he had seen since George Washington Case, and that in fact he was probably faster than Case. If you don't recall Case, lifelong resident of Trenton, New Jersey, he spent 10 years with the Washington Senators beginning in the late 1930s. He led the AL in stolen bases 6 times, stealing up to 61 bases at a time when baseball didn't prioritize running all that much. The Sporting News as of March 29, 1950, which is to say spring training of Jethro's National League rookie year, was already asking in headlines if he was a $100,000 flop based purely on fielding. His throwing motion is cramped. He doesn't use a free overhand toss. Rather, he pushes the ball with a half motion, getting little on the ball. His throws down here, that is in spring training, all have been low, multi-hop affairs. It appears that his shoulder had been damaged previously, and as a result, he can't use his arm loosely and freely. That same year, Joe Williams, columnist of the New York World Telegram, said that Branch Rickey sold the Boston Braves one of his gold brick specialties who doesn't seem to be able to throw it all. Look, Jethro wasn't a great outfielder, but he wasn't Greg Luzinski, he wasn't Adam Dunn. And to borrow from one of the worst Americans ever, Donald Rumsfeld, you go to war with the outfield you have, not the outfield you wish you had. Maybe Jethro would have been better cast in left field like Lonnie Smith, a later player who was really fast but wasn't meant to play center. Think more recently of Carl Crawford, whose kid is in the majors at this point, but insisted on playing left, was super fast but just wasn't comfortable in center. What prevented the Braves from moving Jethro to left? They had an old outfield with Sid Gordon, Willard Marshall, and Tommy Holmes in the corners. In 1951, Holmes had more or less moved on, and it was Gordon and Marshall, so the same guy's just a year older. Thus, and I know this sort of contradiction is hard for some people to get their heads around, not anyone who listens to this show, but Jethro was simultaneously not the ideal choice to play center, but he also was, in the context of what the Braves had, the best choice to play center. I'm not a fan of too many cliches, but I'll tell you one I love, and it goes like this: don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. The shorter version, had I been around circa 1950, would have been, do the Braves have anyone else who can play center? No? Then shut up. But he was getting up there in baseball years. His vision was slipping a bit. In 1952, he turned 35 in real-world terms and slipped to 232, 318, 357. He hit 13 home runs. He walked 68 times. He stole 28 bases in 37 tries. It wasn't good. It was also somewhere north of terrible. And if your center fielder played really great defense, you would take it. Thing was, as we just covered, he didn't. The Braves also had another outfielder coming up from the minors, Bill Bruton, who was younger, also fast, and although not as well-rounded a hitter as non-geriatric Jethro, he was a legit center fielder. Jethro was demoted in his favor. He spent all of 1953 at Toledo and played extremely well, hitting .309 with a career-high 28 home runs. The Pirates, who by then had Branch Rickey as their general manager, traded middle infield prospect Danny O'Connell, another New Jersey guy, to the Braves in return for Gordon, Jethro, 3 other players who were more or less ballast, and $100,000. The point was the $100,000, although they did get a pretty good year out of Sid Gordon, pretty much the last good year of his career. Jethro got one at bat. The Pirates, who were rebuilding, forever rebuilding, and were concentrating on youth, not old fellers, sent Jethro to Toronto, the Maple Leafs, not the Blue Jays, who had yet to be born, and he continued to play really well for a guy who crested and then passed 40 over the next few years. Later on in his post-playing life, he opened a bar in Erie, Pennsylvania. Why Erie? I do not know. As with many such businesses, the bar didn't work out. He also lost his home in a fire and had to move into the bar, which apparently wasn't in the best part of town. He was in dire financial straits and in his 70s, a tough time to make a new start, and because of the brief duration of his major league career, he was short of his pension. He then did something clever. He sued Major League Baseball, arguing that the league's racism had prevented him from qualifying for his pension. True. So true. Spectacularly true. This claim was never adjudicated because baseball argued, and the court agreed, that he had filed his suit outside the statute of limitations. Still, this was a bad look for baseball, and finally the owners kicked in for a small annual pension. It wasn't much, but it meant the world to Sam Jethro. None of us can make up for the past, but we can make the present better. When we try to forget the past, what we're really doing is trying to obscure our moral obligation to fix problems that weren't limited, did not live and die in their time, but lingered on past then into our own present. Why is it our problem? Simply because we're the ones who are here. We're the only ones who can do something about it. Our forebears failed in that regard, and we inherited the problem. What else are we supposed to do with our time? Watch TV? Grow fat and die? We work not only for ourselves, but for the betterment of the world. Otherwise, how are we different from any chipmunk hoarding nuts? Don't you want to be remembered for more than that? For your bulging cheeks? Sam Jethro desegregated a Major League Baseball team. To deny the reason that he was in the position of doing that is to make his entire story incomprehensible and to deprive all of us today of the power of his story. Now, you can argue, if you were there when he sued Major League Baseball, or down to the present day, when other problems which linger from the time of American apartheid still cause us problems, you can argue about what we should do about it, how much we should do about it. And it is even within your right, if you can advance and defend this position, to say that we shouldn't do anything about it at all. But the one thing I know for sure is to deny that it happened is the act of a coward who's afraid to wrestle with a difficult, complex, and yes, shameful problem. One that's included when you accept the whole American package, Mom, the flag, apple pie, Valley Forge, and the rest. No thinking person can accept one without acknowledging the other. In the meantime, give me an outfielder who switch hits 18 home runs and steals 30 bases at a good percentage a year and takes walks at a good clip, and I'll be a very happy guy, even if I do have to play him in left or DH him. Ain't progress grand? After I recorded the Garrett Anderson segment at the beginning of the program, the Angels announced that they will be wearing patches in his honor the rest of the year. I think that is very much appropriate, and again, my sympathies go out to his family. Should you wish to follow me on social media, you can do so at stephengoldman.bsky.social. You can also write us, by which I mean me, at infiniteinning@gmail.com. There remains a Facebook group. Simply go to Facebook, search on Infinite Inning. Bang, you're there. No feet, please. That's your personal business. Should you wish to support the show, and I very much hope you do, please go to patreon.com/theinfiniteinning. That is where I post Dead Player of the Day stories, and will continue to post other things once the series has concluded with number 100. Gear of a rudimentary kind available at the-infinite-inning.creator-spring.com. Original soundtrack available gratis at casualobservermusic.bandcamp.com. Finally, should you find yourself with the proverbial moment to spare, please go to the podcatcher of your choice and rate, review, and subscribe. It helps the show gain attention. And should your podcatcher not let you do those things, hurry to the nearest open mall and stage a flash mob musical about the unfairness of it all. Our theme song, which you're hearing now and have been listening to throughout the episode, was a co-composition of myself and Dr. Rick Mooring, who says, "Midgets, midgets, midgets, landing on my toes, and don't you midgets on my toes even think of parking here." Well, I told you feet were personal, but does anyone listen? No. But nevertheless, I will be back next week with more tales from inside the Infinite Inning.